Well, we're still in AD 30 and we're looking at the last segment of Event 5. You recall the Sunday, this last week, we had the triumphal entry. On Monday, we had the fig tree being cursed and the cleansing of the temple. On Tuesday, we had the challenge to Jesus, by whose authority was he doing these things. Then we had the two sons, one which was agreeable but didn't do what he said he was going to do, and the other one which was disagreeable but repented and did what he said he wouldn't do. And then we had the man who had a vineyard, owned it all, a king, if you will, and left it in the hands of some of those who would not pay him what was due him at the time of harvest. And now we have the marriage feast. This is the third parable, and it's found only in Matthew. It's found in chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. It's a really unusual story, and if I were preaching a message on it, I'd have a hard time deciding what title I wanted to give it. You're Invited, or How Are You Dressed? Those are two titles that would easily come out of this message. There's probably many more if I worked at it a little bit more, but in any case, a king had a marriage feast for his son. And he sent out invitations, and he invited a lot of guests, but they were unwilling to come. So he sent out other slaves and gave the same message to those that were invited. Behold, everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But it says that they paid no attention and went their own way. As a matter of fact, it says that some even seized the slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. Verse 7 says the king was enraged. So he sent his armies and destroyed those that had murdered his slaves and set the city on fire. And he said to the slaves, the wedding feast, those that were invited to the wedding feast are not worthy. Go forth, therefore, into the highways and hedges and invite all. And it's interesting because he says evil and good. We'll come back to that. And it says the hall began to be filled. But the king saw a man who was not dressed in wedding clothes. And he asked him, he said, "Friend, why have you come without wedding clothes?" The man was speechless. The king had the servants bind him hand and foot, threw him out into the outer darkness where there's a gnashing of teeth. Now, let's pull this apart a little bit. When I made my own notes, I looked at these invitations and I thought the first invitation was to the Jews through the Old Testament prophets. The second invitation was through Jesus, John the Baptist, and his disciples. And the third invitation came from the founding of the church at Pentecost and the challenge to go ye into the world, making disciples everywhere. John Phillips didn't agree with that in his commentary, but J. Vernon McGee did. It doesn't really matter, except that the invitation has gone out. A lot of people have refused to come. A lot are indifferent to the invitation. A lot have been antagonistic towards the invitation and towards those that made it. There's no question that all of those things occurred. As to the armies coming and destroying and murdering those to kill those that murdered and set the city afire, it appears that's probably a short-term prophecy towards the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem when the Roman Empire became so strong. Going into the highways and the hedges and inviting both evil and good is only difficult if you don't really understand that Evil here doesn't mean that they were unrighteous. It means they may have been living unrighteous lives, and some might have been living upstanding lives, but they were still invited. I'm glad, because when Lois and I give our testimony, my testimony is one of being evil, unrighteous in every way, and hers coming from a good Christian family who tried to live righteously and ethically and morally. We're good. So there we find the evil and the good. We're all invited. But then comes this interesting section that talks about the man that's not in the wedding clothes. It's important to understand the custom of the day, for kings would have weddings and they would provide clothes. Well, they would provide an outer garment, a robe, a special robe, a celebration robe, a robe that said, I've been invited by the king and I've accepted his invitation. But he wasn't wearing his wedding robe. You see, he couldn't use the excuse, I didn't have one, because the king provided them. He couldn't use the excuse, I didn't have time to put it on, because it was offered at the time that you entered into the relationship of the wedding feast. You see, there are a lot of people who have head knowledge but no heart knowledge. Those that really have never entered into the marriage, those that have really never accepted Christ. And my friends, there will come a time when, if that doesn't change, they will be cast into the outer darkness, separated from God, where there's a gnashing of teeth. This is an incredibly rich story. I want to encourage you to go and read it for yourself. Think about it. Think about this wedding invitation. Think about how many it's been issued to. And then think about whether or not you have on the wedding clothes. Do you have on the king's clothes? Are you already part of the kingdom of God? Therefore, you know you're going to be in the kingdom of heaven as well. Yes, it's a thought for the day, isn't it? That's my thought. God bless you and have a great day.